talk, hands up, who was here? Okay, I don't want you to engage in this this question, because it'll ruin it. Okay, so I'm going to put a statement on the board, right? And I want you guys put your hands up when you see the fault in the statement, when you see the error in the statement, okay? I'm going to read it out. So can you find the mistake? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Put your hands up when you see the mistake. And if you have seen this before, don't engage. So I'll read it out again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We've got a few people. Everyone else is quite slow. You weren't listening to me. You still not found it? Who's found it? Okay. About 3, 4 people? 5 people? 6 people? Everyone else is still listening. What if I say, look outside of the box? Hands up now, so you can see it. A few more people, but still not everyone. Okay, so who saw this for the first time and has solved it? Sister here, you want to say what the mistake is?
There's 2 there's.
Yeah, so if you look at the question, it says, can you find the mistake? Now, the problem with people is generally, when we get a question asked to us, the first thing that we do is we look straight at the answer. We're trying to find the answer and look at the fault in the answer. The problem is when you've got a faulty question, you can't really answer the question, right? So this is why the principle comes that we should question the question before questioning our own beliefs. So again, with the Phil Taylor thing, we question the question: what is a sportsman? What constitutes as a successful sportsman? They're more pertinent questions than answering the question itself. And coming back to the question of why do you believe in God, we have to question that question before we move further on. So we're going to do that inshallah. Is everyone on the same page? Does everything make sense? Cool. Okay, the reason we do so, we've got iceberg and we've got a weed. The problem is when you have this Islam, when you have someone coming up and says, why do you believe in God? You just see what is on the surface, right? You see the tip of the iceberg, or you just see the picture of the weed, the leaves of the weed. That's all you see. You don't see the underlying thought processes and reasons for why that person is even asking the question in the first place. You don't see the depth that the iceberg actually submerges itself in the water. You don't see the extensive root system that actually interlocks into that person's mind when he actually formulates that question in the first place. And the problem we have as Muslims is when we answer these sort of questions, we literally answer it on the surface, very superficial answers. And one of those answers is, well, look at the universe, it's very complicated. And yes, like a weed, you can clip at it, you can snip off all the leaves, and you can remove it for a temporary period of time. But if we don't uproot the weed, what you'll realize, it will manifest itself again in a couple of weeks. So in order to sort of remove the weed of doubt from an individual's mind, you have to really uproot the root cause. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So we're going to question the question and not just try and find an answer to the question that's posed to us. So coming back to the question is, why do you believe in God? Now straight away, the question is beckoning us, is asking for us for evidence. The question is why? Give us evidence for your belief in God. And then we need to ask ourselves, well, what constitutes for evidence? Now, all of you, I believe, who here isn't a Muslim? Okay, we've got one person that's not a Muslim. Majority of people here are Muslims, right? So, what faith do you follow? Do you follow any faith at all?
Yeah, Christianity.
So you're a Christian, okay, great. So, all of us in this room, we all believe in some sort of theology. We're all theists, right? So if someone comes to us and they say to us, you know what? I had a vision, and in this vision, God X came to me and said, I have to renounce my faith. All the faiths that are going on in this world are completely wrong. Would you believe that individual? Yes or no? No. Everyone else is happy to believe in God X. No one's going to renounce everyone's going to renounce? No. Yes or no? No, you wouldn't. Why? Because is that sufficient evidence for you? No, a vision, someone else's vision, isn't sufficient evidence for you. So now you need to understand that when someone with a lot of backstory, with very deep roots in atheism, in science, whatever it is, comes to you and says, why does God exist? Prove to me, give me evidence that God exists. He has a specific standard of evidence, right? In the same way you won't accept a vision from someone, he probably won't accept whatever you have to come. You need to understand what is his level of evidence. What constitutes for him as evidence, so you're both at the level playing field and you can understand one another. Evidence generally can be explained as a body of facts or information which indicates whether a belief or proposition is true or not. So what they're really asking you, give me some sort of information or evidence to show that your proposition that God exists is true. Okay, so we're looking for the truth. Now let's look more closely at what evidence they feel is suitable. Okay? So when it comes to an agnostic, an atheist, someone living in this Western civilization in the 21st century, for them, the truth is got closer to via science. Science leads towards the truth. It may not get you certainly at the truth, but it will definitely lead you towards the truth. And an example of that is when I say, again I'll ask a simple question, who believes that the earth is flat? Anyone here that believes the earth is flat? We've got one miskin over there that believes it's flat. Oh, we've got two now. Okay, who believes that the earth is spherical? The majority of the people, some people are still undecided. Okay, so generally we believe that the earth is spherical. So if you ask any person, why do you believe the earth is spherical? They'd answer you and they say, we believe the earth is spherical because this scientist says this, or this textbook says this, or my teacher said this. This is why we believe the earth is spherical. They wouldn't say it's because I went to this holy scripture and, for example, I don't know, went to this, the Torah, for example, and the Torah told me that it was spherical. They wouldn't do that. They go to their legitimate sources of evidence, which would be the science textbooks or the scientists or whatever. However, so majority, apart from two people for some reason, believe it's spherical, right? Who here can prove to me with the evidence and the mathematical calculation and the actual experiments that were taking place that the earth is spherical? Who can do that for me right now? No one can do that. So we got one person that can do that. Would you like to share this information?
I do know that there are ways to do it with shadows. That
Okay.
explains it.
Would you like to explain that further?
I can't remember exactly.
Okay, so we got some sort of ideas that shadows may help us, but shadows by themselves aren't proving to us that. Okay, we've got something here.
Supporting the argument, I would say eclipses.
Eclipses? What does eclipse tell me?
So eclipses, you have a shadow of the Earth and the Moon
Okay.
during the lunar eclipse, and it's spherical in shape.
Okay.
So that.
Well, that could prove that the Earth is a flat circle. People that say that the Earth is flat, they don't say it's just like a rectangle. It's a flat circle because it is a cover for Earth. Everywhere can see the eclipse.
Okay. I'll be honest, I don't know how to prove it either. I just want to see if anyone knows. Hands down. We'll come back to you in a minute. The reason I asked that question is the majority of the people here, we got a few people that are talking about shadows and eclipses and whatever, but the majority of us here, we don't actually know how to prove that. We don't know how to prove that the earth is spherical, but we're happy, we're content to sit back and say the earth is spherical. Is that not faith in something? Have we not just shown a jump and a leap of faith towards someone that's taught us, whether that be a textbook, a scientist, or whatever? Because we haven't actually done the calculation, nor have we looked at the evidence, but we believe that someone's done the calculation. So we have the faith in that individual that they've done, and they've gone by and done that process. Now this is the case for the majority of lay people when it comes to science. It's the case for the majority of scientists. They have to have testimony, the key word here is testimony. They have to have testimony that someone before them, or a theory that they are using, has been conducted and the calculations have been done, because it's too difficult for us to exhaust all our time looking through every calculation. So the first thing you need to understand is that the individual, when he's asking for evidence, well, firstly, for him, testimony is enough. He believes, for example, that the earth is spherical, but he doesn't need to do the calculations himself. So testimony is enough. So we know that, number one. So that's when we start talking about faith. Faith is good enough for someone who's an atheist and agnostic. As much as they might not believe it, it is good enough. Okay, so moving on. How does science actually work? So that was the first point, remember that. How does science work? This is the second point. Science in its general outlook has this main framework, which is you make an observation, and through that observation you ask yourself a series of questions, you formulate a hypothesis. From that hypothesis you then gather data together, develop testable predictions, and then from that you can refine and alter the initial hypothesis that you had. You can then repeatedly test it, so you can see that this thing that the results that you've got hasn't just happened once, it's not by chance, it's happened a second time, a third time, a fourth time, and from there you can develop a general theory. Now generally this is how science works. This is the mechanism by which it works. Now the problem here is the second element of faith which we're going to uncover. So there are two types of arguments. There is the deductive argument and there is the inductive argument. Now the deductive argument is an argument, for example like maths, which is a self-proof. 1 plus 1 equals 2, you can't argue against that. 1 plus 1 has to equal 2. 2 times 2 equals 4, you can't argue against that. It could also be something like a tautology. A tautology is basically a sentence that proves itself. For example, premise 1, a monkey is a mammal. Premise 2, Osama is a monkey. Conclusion, therefore, Osama is a mammal. So if we agree with premise 1 and 2, we have to agree with the conclusion. There's no arguments here. That is deductive logic. The problem is when we move on to something like inductive logic. So, for example, a drug called X is given to 2,000 people. All these 2,000 people that had a certain illness, as soon as they take drug X, they're cured of this really bad illness. Osama comes, he's got this similar illness. We give him drug X. Will drug X work on Osama, yes or no? It's worked on 2,000 people, will it work on Osama who has the same illness? Yes or no?
You don't know.
Hands up, hands up. What are we saying?
We don't know.
We don't know. Who says we don't know? Okay. Who says it's good reason to believe that it will work? Who believes it won't work at all? Okay, so this is how science basically works. We've tested it on 2,000 people. It's worked for 2,000 people. So it's logically justifiable to think that, yeah, it's going to work on Osama. But the thing is, Osama might have some next congenital birth defect that we don't know about, something idiopathic, and therefore it doesn't work on him. So that is the problem of science. So it's another faith, it's another jump of faith, leap of faith, thinking that it can probably work, but it might not work, and therefore we have to have faith that it will work. So that's the second line of faith. And if that doesn't make sense, a very simple example is if I have a sack, it's got 10 marbles in it, 9 green marbles, 1 red marble, and I ask you to take out 8 marbles and you take out 8, and all marbles have been green so far. You take out the 9th marble, it's also green, and then I ask you, okay, take out the final 10th marble, you take that out, and before you take it out, I ask you what color is it going to be. You'll logically presume, yeah, it's going to be green because everything else has been green, but when you take it out, you realize it's red. That's the problem with science, because it uses past experiences to predict future consequences or future results. Now, what's interesting here, and what I don't want you guys to fall into, is the number of marbles doesn't matter. I could have 5 billion green marbles and only 1 red marble. But if you take out 4.8 billion green marbles, that doesn't disprove that there is a red marble in the bag, even though your experiences are telling you that it should be green, the next one. So there's always faith involved. Does anyone not understand that point? Because if you don't, I can try and explain it in a different way. Does that make sense? Yeah, should I pick on someone if it makes sense? Okay, I trust you. Okay, so that's the 2 lines of faith. The first, what was the first line of faith?
Testimony.
Testimony. What's the second line of faith?
Inductive reasoning.
Inductive reasoning. What does that mean?
That means we predict the future based on the past and assume it's going to follow the same pattern.
Exactly. So the experiments that we do, past events that we have, we use that and we predict future consequences for that. And that's exactly how science works. So if we look back at the Osama drug case, 2,000 people we've used this drug on, so it should work on the 2001 person, but it might not. And we have to have faith that it will work on them. So that's the second line of faith. And one of the greatest philosophers of science to have ever lived, Karl Popper, who's venerated by all of this science world, he says this: theories can never be inferred from observation statements or rationally justified by them. Therefore, a rational person is the one who refuses to use inductive inference, that is, he refuses to extrapolate from the past to the future from a finite number of observations to a more general theory. Now, in simple English, what does this mean? The best way to explain it is an example, basically. We all believe gravity exists. No one here is going to deny that gravity exists. Now, the thing with gravity is it's been tested numerous times. It's testing numerous times just in this room. Every one of you seated, you're not floating up and down because gravity exists. However, we still call it the theory of gravity for a reason. It's not called the fact of gravity. Why? Because we only need one more event to disprove gravity actually exists. And therefore, we have to have faith that gravity actually exists. So it's still faith-based. For it to become a factual piece of evidence, we need to have conducted the test an infinite number of times. And obviously, because we can't do that, we'll never move from theory to actual fact. So again, we've seen that science inherently is based upon faith. And finally, we're going to talk a bit about science and pseudoscience. Now, who knows what pseudoscience is? Can anyone give me an explanation of what is pseudoscience? What does that mean? No one knows what pseudoscience is. You heard of the word pseudo? Got a few nods.
Something that seems scientific, but it doesn't actually follow that process that you've got in the board area of observation, deduction.
Exactly right. So in the past, pseudoscience is a word that they used mainly in the past, and it was quite a derogatory term to sort of diss the humanities subject, saying that things like psychology and sociology, they're not really science. In this day and age, they don't really use the word pseudoscience because we do get a lot of benefits from things like psychology and sociology, and they demarcate it by saying that the hard sciences or the true sciences are things like physics, chemistry, and biology. Everything outside of that is probably the soft sciences or pseudoscience, that's what they call it. But the question then becomes, what actually demarcates? What makes physics more superior to something like sociology? Why is physics so much better than psychology? We have to this is a really important issue that we're going to delve into now. And in order to understand that, we're going to talk about two theories at the time of Karl Popper, who I just mentioned when he was alive. And one is Einstein's relativity system, and the other is Freud's theory of wish fulfillment. Does anyone know Einstein's theory of relativity and wants to explain it to the group? Anyone here knows what Einstein's relativity theory is? I know some of you definitely do know because I've had conversations. Abdurrahman, what is Einstein's theory of relativity? You study physics.
Okay, so imagine you're walking and someone's walking faster than you, and you're walking at a speed of 5 meters per second, and he's walking at a speed of 10 meters per second. For you, does it feel like he's moving at 5 or 10 meters per second? 5. So imagine you got someone, well we know the fastest speed is the speed of light, right? Say someone's on an airship and he puts a torch, and then someone in the edge, like outside the airship, observes the airship moving at a speed, and he's pointing the torch as well. I think I might to draw it to make it easier. But would he see the speed of the airship plus the speed of the torch? Which is technically quicker than the speed of light, right?
Anyone else? Either I've got it wrong, or like you're talking about something. Something else in my life. Okay, cool. Just a quick, just want to make my clarification just in case I haven't made a mistake. So when we talk about space-time, right, is that relativity right? Relativity theory when we talk about space-time.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. Okay, so to explain the system at hand, I'll use a different analogy, right? So Einstein's theory of relativity was that space and time aren't two distinct things. Both space and time are interlinked. They're one thing, right? Space. That's why they call it space-time. Now, when you have a really large mass like the sun, it can actually cause. If you think this is space-time and you put the sun as a large mass on this fabric of space-time, it creates an indent, and so it warps your vision. So I think that's what you meant by the light and actually viewing it, right? So that's the sort of simplistic way of how I can explain the theory of relativity. So that's that, and we'll come back to that. The second thing is Freud's theory of wish fulfillment. Does anyone do psychology or know the theory of wish fulfillment? No. Okay, so his theory of wish fulfillment is a very simple theory. It is when you go to sleep, you have a dream. Your dream will tell you what you wish to see. So it fulfills your wishes. Okay, so of the two, which one of them is science and which one of them is pseudoscience? Einstein's theory of relativity or wish fulfillment theory by Freud? Kind of written it on the board as well.
Say Freud's is pseudoscience because you can't really test your dreams.
Potentially, yeah.
Or like prove it wrong if you are.
Yeah. So the question here is then why is Freud pseudoscience and why is Einstein science? Well, the thing is, with science, if you read into the methodology of science, what makes science a science is the ability to actually falsify the theory that you put forward. So when Einstein puts forward his theory of relativity, it's vulnerable to being falsified. And the way that is vulnerable to being falsified was when there was an eclipse of the sun. Basically, if you think of a constellation of stars in the sky, there's a constellation of stars, and what was said is when the sun gets closer to that constellation, because of space-time it gets warped. When we look at the constellation of stars, they will be in a different place to where we normally would see them when the sun is close, because the sun is a large mass, it warps space-time, and so light doesn't travel directly to us in our eyes. We see this constellation of stars at a different point. The only time that can be observed is during an eclipse when the sun isn't in our eyes so we can actually see it. So the eclipse occurred, we looked through the telescope, we saw that the constellation of stars was actually at a different position than we thought it would be. Now that shows that Einstein, if the constellation of stars was where we would assume them to be, he would have been proven wrong. So it's open to be falsified. But because it wasn't, it was at a different point, he actually proved his theory to be true. Now if we come to pseudoscience, if we come to Freud's theory of wish fulfillment, there was actually a test that was done. One of Freud's patients was a woman, and she had a dream of something that she didn't actually wish for. She had a dream that she was spending her summer afternoon with her mother-in-law, and that's something that she really disliked. And when she came to Freud, she explained to him, well, I don't like to spend time with my mother-in-law. That wasn't wish fulfillment to me, so clearly that disproves your theory. Freud replied, well, the thing is, you wanted to disprove my theory anyway, so your dream fulfilled your wish to disprove my theory by disproving my theory, and therefore my theory is correct. Does that make sense? So Freud's theory is actually, he's created this thing where it's basically immune to being falsified. And obviously then you can sort of argue anything in that case. And so that's why we don't agree that Freud's theory of wish fulfillment is a science, because it's not open to falsifiability. So that's the third point. So the third point is, this person that comes up to you and asks you for evidence of God, he wants something that's falsifiable. He doesn't want something like Freud's theory.